Hi, I'm Michelle Pegler of Gingy Makes Quilts, and I'm here today to give you a tip around the third Sewcialites block. Sewcialites is a free sew-along hosted by Fat Quarter Shop, and I've already made one version of this block. The layout is a little bit different, and I'll tell you more about that later, but I'm going to show you one more version, and specifically how to do the flying geese portions 4 at a time rather than 1 at a time. So you get to save some time on cutting and on putting together those flying geese. So let's get started. So let's talk about the flying geese in this pattern. This pattern has 4 flying geese, which they have as the pink and white sections around the edges of the block. And the pattern will tell you to make those flying geese 1 at a time. I, whenever possible, like to make flying geese 4 at a time. And I have a calculator to be able to convert any pattern to use 4 at a time method, and it's linked in the video description. And so I've already used that tool to figure out what cutting sizes you would need to do for all 3 sizes of this block. And this is going to be 4 at a time and trimming down. So I'm going to show you how to do the 4 at a time, and then also show you how to use a ruler to trim those units down to the size you need. So first of all, just the cutting. This is going to replace pieces A and E in the pattern. And the reason I like to do 4 at a time is because you just get to cut fewer things and sew fewer things. That's why it's a little bit faster. So for instance, in the traditional pattern, to make 4 flying geese, you would need 4 rectangles of your background A fabric and then 8 fabric E squares. But doing 4 at a time, you only have to cut 1 big square of your background, so that's this A piece here, and then only 4 of fabric E. So these are the measurements you would need to cut for the 9-inch block. It's 5 7/8 square, and then 3 3/8 for the smaller squares. And so I've already cut that out of my fabrics. So I've got my background here, and then my 4 other squares. And I'll show you how to put those together in a minute. But if you need to take a screenshot to get the other measurements, I'll just set that here for a minute. All right, and then the other thing that I do need to do, since these are large, is I will need to actually mark the back of them, because this is gonna cover up the lines on my machine that I normally use to sew, HSTs or corner squares or anything. So what I like to do for that is just use I think these are called a Hera marker, or like a bone pick, I've heard it called, and I use that to mark. The reason I like this is that it shows up really well on almost all fabrics, and it makes a really clear line to follow as I'm sewing that. So I'm just going to show you the first 2, but I will go ahead and mark all of these. And then with the first 2, what you'll need to do is pin them on here, on your bigger square. I am not worrying about my fabric directionality here, because these are pretty much non-directional prints. I'm not too worried about them going a particular direction. But if you have directional prints, you actually can get these to all go in the right direction in this pattern. So you could just do a 4 at a time, and then because there's a unit on each side of the block, it can work out so that all the fabrics are going the right direction, whatever that means to you and your fabrics. And if you do want the diagram on how to do that, I'll pop it up here on the screen, but also that diagram is linked in that same conversion tool that's in the video description. So this is how to start the 4 at a time method. I've taken 2 of my smaller squares, and you can see that I pinned one on one corner and the other on the opposite corner. And so you can see that line I marked with my bone pick is really clear. And so I'm going to go sew on a 1/4 inch on either side of that line. And then we're going to cut on the marked line and then press these all open. So I'll show you that in a minute. So I went ahead and sewed down either side of that middle line, and then I cut these apart. Since they are diagonal seams, I'm going to go ahead and press them open. I press almost all my diagonal seams open. In the rare case where there's an opportunity to nest them, I do, but that's not the case for this pattern. So open works great. So at this point in the 4 at a time method, you're going to have these heart shapes. And don't worry, they will become flying geese. This is when you take your other 2 squares, which I marked the diagonal on, and you lay them so that the diagonal is coming from this last background corner. And again, I'm gonna pin these so that that doesn't move as I'm sewing it. And I'm gonna go do the same thing to each of these, where I'm gonna sew a 1/4 inch on each side of that marked line. Then again, I'm gonna cut on the marked line and come and press them. I wanna show you one thing with regarding putting this last square on each of these halves. When you're doing your 1/4 inch away from that center diagonal, you should end up sewing out kind of right at this little intersection between the fabric you've already sewn on and this new fabric. So you can see there's kind of like a little divot in there. That's about where you want your seam to come through. Right there. And then same on the other side. It's going to come right at that little intersection. So like I said, for each one of these little hearts, I sewed down 1/4 inch on either side and then cut these apart. So now I'm going to do the same thing I did on the first round. I'm just going to go straight to the back here and press these open. And if they are standing up a little bit more than I'd like, I might put them under the clapper just to get those nice and flat. And then the next step at this point is to trim them down to the proper size. So I'll show you that next. I've got my untrimmed unit here, and then I'm going to look to the pattern to see what I need to trim it to. So the pattern will tell you the size that each flying geese unit should be at this point. So I'm making the largest one, which means I need to trim these to 2 3/4 by 5 inches. So the way I like to do that is grab my 6.5 square inch ruler. I'm going to use this diagonal line on top of the diagonal of my block, and then I'm going to put the point at the halfway mark. So if this is going to be 5 inches wide, that means that needs to be at 2.5. So I'm going to come in here, 2.5. I'm going to line up that diagonal line, and then as a double check, you can see where the other diagonal hits, and it's right at that 5 inches. So this is going to be perfect. I'm going to go ahead and trim the first 2 sides. And then spin it around and trim the other 2. So we're going to 5 by 2 3/4. Line up those edges. And then trim the other sides off. So now I have a perfectly sized flying geese unit. At this point, you can put together this block as normal, as per the directions. This is what it would look like. One last little bonus tip here is if you want to consider turning your flying geese around, you can actually make a nice star instead. And I will be doing that for my block because I really like star blocks and I like how that looks. So I'm going to put it together like this instead. And I'll show you my finished block and my scrappy block as well in a minute. Here are my 2 finished 9-inch blocks. As you can see, I decided to do the star layout on both because I just really like how that looked. And I used the same 4 at a time flying geese method on both of these, and they turned out great. So hopefully that's helpful to you. And I did make a whole video going more in depth in that conversion tool for half square triangles and flying geese. So feel free to check that out. It's linked in the description if you want to learn more and use it all the time, just like I do. I hope that all helped. I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.